Yeah, biculturalism.
Biculturalism.
There you go.
So you say that we're a Hmong church, so like even though we're welcoming other people, like what characteristics of this church will make a Hmong church?
It's a really good question. We've wrestled with that very question, is what does a Hmong church look like if you speak English? If you think about first generation churches, if you remove the language, what makes it Hmong? Is it stories from Laos? Is it traditional songs? And we actually really wrestled with that question. So here are a few things that we've talked about that we want to include that kind of makes this a Hmong church. One is Hmong community. One of the things we consistently hear over and over again from people, particularly people who have left the Hmong church to go to a Megat church, they go to or Eagle Brook or something like that. One of the things we hear over and over again is, I love the teaching, but I miss Hmong community. And so that's part of what makes this kind of a Hmong church. One of the other things that makes this identifies as a Hmong church is that during the sermons that we will incorporate and talk about Hmong values. We can talk about first generation values versus second generation values. We can talk about Hmong cultural values versus American cultural values. So we want to be able to talk about values, particularly Hmong values. And so those are two things that we've built in so far. Some of the other things we're thinking of is, for instance, one of the things I want to do is I actually want to get a cross up here. Because this thing isn't movable if you've ever wondered what this giant thing is. This is where the school puts their podium or their projector. So it's just stuck here. I'm like, what are we going to do with this thing? So I was thinking that we get a big old black cover over it, and I wanted to get a cross, because we don't have like a cross up on the stage. And so I actually have a couple pieces, a big 6-foot pieces of bamboo that I've kind of sketched out to make a bamboo cross. Because I've looked at gold crosses and a silver cross, and I'm like, that's not us. Other churches, but then before I found this picture of a bamboo cross, I'm like, yeah. Where we're kind of honoring the Asian heritage of the Hmong and other kind of Asian cultures who might be involved here. And so little things like that. One of the other things we're thinking about is we've got some more black curtains. You've probably seen the black curtains out in the lobby. We've actually got more of those that we're going to be putting up. We just need more hooks and stuff. But we're putting up against the trophy case. And one of the things that we want to do is we actually want to, I want to start hanging some art, particularly Hmong-inspired art. Before I got this wonderful piece of artwork, or Asian-inspired art. Got this amazing piece of artwork that someone had painted for her, and it's this Hmong woman sort of in traditional outfit, and a sun with these words of like love and grace and forgiveness kind of coming down from this bursting sun, and she's with her hands up on this field that kind of looks like the old Windows start screen, and it's this beautiful painting. I'm like, that's what I want in our lobby. I want some artwork that reflects this Hmong Christian experience. So some stuff like that. Even some of our designs. One of the things, Tusu Vang, who's our creative director, most of the designs you see around here come from him. Okay, and he's amazing and talented, and we even talk about how to incorporate small, kind of an Asian flavor or a Hmong flair to some of our designs. This is an ongoing conversation that we have, because this is sort of a kind of uncharted territory to be intentionally Hmong, but take away, like, not make it about language. Then what do we make it out of? So if you have ideas, I would love to hear it. Come talk to me. Talk to one of our leaders about what it could look like for this to be a church with a Hmong identity. I also share kind of one of our plans. We don't expect, so we'll pause there. Does that kind of answer your question? Awesome, thank you. Well, I'll also share a little bit of our prognosticating that we've been doing, which is looking into the future. We don't expect this to stay a Hmong church forever. In fact, we're already planning on it. We don't know when, and we don't know what it will transform into. But we know this. The third generation will be graduating high school in less than 10 years. Which means in less than 10 years, our mission statement will no longer be hope and healing for second Gen Hmong. Because we'll need second and third Gen Hmong. Okay? There are other things happening within Hmong cultural trends. So rates of outmarriage. In other words, rates of marrying big white guys and big black guys and small Hispanic girls and people outside Hmong, those rates are increasing. Okay? Chances are, in fact, we kind of joke, almost every Hmong family has a Greg now. Think about it. Go to many of these family events, there's some non-Hmong person sitting off to the side feeling really awkward. Okay? That's just been, and that is increasing. So you give that more and more years, and there are going to be more and more cross-cultural marriages. Another pattern that we're seeing is that you guys, as second Gen Hmong, and then as the third Gen get a little older, are having more and more significant non-Hmong friendships. Whereas your parents most likely have zero significant non-Hmong friendships. They might have a coworker that they say hi to, but that might be it. But that's changing. Because you guys are having more and more significant non-Hmong friendships. Someone you would like to invite to church. So all of these trends that we're seeing is telling us that we cannot stay a monocultural church forever. And we don't intend to. So there are two potential patterns RiverLife might take. And we don't know, we genuinely won't know until the kind of the life and the demographic the Hmong live out. Okay? So there are two patterns that we've seen. One is that we will turn multicultural. Oh, one of the other big reasons why some people ask, well, why are you guys a Hmong church? The bottom line is, for second Gen Hmong, 18 to 35, most people in that group still spend most of their time with other Hmong. It is a rare exception where a second Gen Hmong, 18 to 35, lives a bicultural life. Most of them, what we have found, are still living fairly monocultural. And I mean, if we sat down, you would probably agree with that probably most of your life, maybe half of your life, for some of you, all of your life, might still be monocultural. So to be honest, we don't actually believe that most Hmong want a multicultural church experience, most second Gen Hmong. But we believe that's going to change. Okay? So there are two routes that we could take here, and we don't know which one we're going to take. One of them could be what's called a Pan-Asian church. This is something that's been seen in the Korean and Chinese churches, is that many of those, rather than being a second gen or a third generation Chinese, they go into what's called a Pan-Asian church, where it can consist of Chinese and Japanese and Korean, people speaking Mandarin and Cantonese. And it's still a distinctly Asian church, but it's diverse in its Asianness. So we've talked about what if RiverLife were to eventually become like a pan-Southeast Asian church? You know, where the Twin Cities has high numbers of Karen refugees, not as many Vietnamese refugees or like Thai or Lao refugees, but who knows what the future could hold. So if there becomes this large group of Southeast Asians, or perhaps Asians, including East Asians, then maybe RiverLife will become a Pan-Asian church. And it's actually proven to be very successful among the Chinese and Korean churches. That's one route RiverLife might take. The other route that RiverLife might take is to go multicultural. And this one is really dependent on watching the Hmong cultural pattern, behavioral patterns. Because if Hmong as people group become more diverse in their socialization, in their friendship circles, then this is a very likely scenario. If maybe the rates of outmarriage, if they start going skyrocketing like they are, like Japanese, I believe, or something, almost 50% of Japanese are outmarried. If something like that starts to happen in the Hmong church, then we definitely will go this direction. So that's what we've thought about so far, and we don't know. We don't know which direction RiverLife will take. But I can guarantee you this: we will not be like this 10 years from now. Because the Hmong identity is going to radically change when the third generation grows up. It's going to be a big challenge, and we as a church will have to be able to meet that challenge. Otherwise, then we will just become stuck in our ways and kind of dead and dying. And I don't want that for RiverLife. I want us to be alive and well and strong for decades and decades to go. Yeah, okay, so I'll say a couple others here. See what we got. Okay, here we go. Oh, let's see what this one is. Why do Hmong people have a hard time with the word second gen? You know, I was really intrigued when I started reading about second gen Chinese and Korean churches. So to answer the question, I don't know. I think a big part of it is the lack of familiarity with the concept. Mostly because your parents, the older generation, still has such a very strong hold on the churches and the language and the topics that are discussed. So to most Hmong over 40, there isn't first and second generation. There is just Hmong. Everybody is the same. That was kind of my impression. So I got really surprised that I never heard Hmong use the term second gen. Whereas if you go into Korean and Chinese circles, they've been using that concept for years. But they, like the Hmong, didn't always. And so I think it's a term that nobody talks about it. The existing churches aren't really talking about it. And it's not like we have Hmong scholars who are writing papers, like professional scholars who are writing papers in journals talking about second gen Hmong. So I think in many ways it's a new term. I wasn't aware of a single church that used the term second gen Hmong as explicitly as RiverLife does. And partly because I just want to get it out there. I think, and it's not putting down the first gen, and it's not elevating the second gen. It's just identifying that there's a change. There are two different groups within the Hmong world. And so I believe there's value in using that term because it kind of gives identity, gives validation to this identity that you guys are different than your parents, which is something for a lot of your parents' age in the first generation, that's a terrifying concept, that you're different from them. And it's one of the reasons why so many of them kind of want you to act like them. Because to know that this idea that Hmong identity is changing is a terrifying concept to the first generation. But it's just the reality. Did other Asian groups have this struggle? Yes. If you ever want to do some reading, there are some amazing books out there on Asian American churches. Okay? Because the Hmong church, what the Hmong church is going through right now is what the Chinese and the Korean churches went through about 30 years ago. Because they emigrated to the United States much earlier than you guys did, obviously, your parents. And so they already went through all of this. And there's some amazing writing out there by authors. And if you'd like to read some books, I did a whole independent study on Asian American Christian ministry when I was in seminary and read some phenomenal books. So I can definitely recommend some authors. I might even post them up on our website. One of them we as a leadership team have started reading is one called Growing Healthy Asian American Churches. It's actually, in my opinion, the best book I've read. It's a compilation book. And it is fabulous because what's amazing is what the Hmong church as a whole is going through right now isn't new. In fact, the Chinese and Korean churches faced it 30 years ago, and unfortunately, they didn't handle it well. And as a result, they lost about a whole generation. And then the older leaders started to pick up that something needed to change. So, in fact, if there's one thing you should read, and I'll put this up on the website as well, or I'll stick up on Facebook, is there's an amazing article by an author named Helen Lee called Silent Exodus. She was the first person to publicly write about second generation Chinese and Koreans leaving the church. It was published in 1996. And she was really the first one to write. And then following that, the first major book was called Embracing the Pearl or Honoring the Pearl. Oh, dang it, Chasing the Pearl? It's all about pearl. But it was the first book written, I think it was 98, and then some more were written after that. But this article called Silent Exodus, she actually coined the term. And what it was this leaving, this mass leaving of second-gen Chinese and Korean from their churches. Sound familiar? So the Hmong churches are undergoing a silent exodus right now. But this was back in 96. And it was about, by then it was about maybe 5-7 years already happening. So you can actually Google that. There are segments of it out online. You can find that. It is an amazing read because you'll read it, and if you just substitute the word Hmong for the words Chinese or Korean, you're like, they're talking about our churches. It's pretty amazing. So yes, and that's why I've read of these other authors, these Chinese and Korean authors, because they've gone through what the Hmong church as a whole right now is going through. And so a lot of what RiverLife was shaped by our forefathers of the Chinese and Korean churches. So I highly encourage you, if that's interesting to you, come talk to me. I'll recommend some more books. There are some great ones out there. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Here's a tough one, and I'll answer this fairly honestly. Why aren't there more second-gen churches in the Twin Cities? Okay, the simple answer to that, and again, I am coming from an outsider's perspective. I have my biases. I'll put those out on the table. My interpretation of it is because for most of the churches right now, there are 50 Hmong churches and ministries in the Twin Cities. Okay? Most of them are geared toward the first generation. Just like I explicitly say, hope and healing for second-gen Hmong. Many of the churches should really just say, biblical teaching for first-gen Hmong, because that's their goal. And so for some churches, there are a few things of why this is going on. For some, leaders are seeing the church as the last chance to save the culture. Have you ever been in one of those churches where it's kind of the church's job to keep Hmong culture alive? So we're going to do Hmong classes. We're going to teach the kids Hmong. We are not going to preach in English, because if you don't understand Hmong, you should come to the sermons and you can learn it. I've actually been told that multiple times over the years. It doesn't work. And so very simply, so there are a couple things happening. I believe if you look at the people who are in influence within the Hmong Christian culture. I know very little about the Hmong non-Christian culture, unfortunately, but I've been around Hmong Christian culture a fair amount. Now, is that most of those leaders still believe that cultural identity is monolithic. In other words, there is one definition of what it means to be Hmong. And if you're not within this definition, then you get criticized by your auntie and your grandma that you're not Hmong enough, or you hate being Hmong, you should speak the language, blah, 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 okay? But because they, in some ways, they don't want to see that it's changing. Because that is a terrifying thing for first-generation immigrants, to see that everything they've known is changing. So that's one thing that's happening, is some people aren't acknowledging that you guys are different than your parents. Okay? Another thing that's happening is that in other churches, that they don't want to kind of share power. When it comes to hiring a new pastor, they would rather hire an older pastor than a young pastor. Because then they know the older pastor will share their same values. I'm not saying this is all the churches, but there are some out there who it's about power. Okay? For some, it's about just language. We need to teach our kids Hmong, so we have to have Hmong speaking churches. And so there are a lot of reasons. Also, a lack of leaders kind of stepping up to be able to lead effectively. We have a bunch of people who can kind of lead so effectively, but if you think about it, I'm 44 now. I was about to be 43. Okay, so I'm 44 now. Okay? There are not many 44-year-old Hmong people who could understand how to do a second generation church well. There are some out there, and I really love them. but most of the people who could understand how to do a second gen church well are younger, because they're more second gen. And often younger means they kind of lack some of the experience and training and life experience and marriage experience and all of that. So those are some of the reasons why I've seen, at least. And again, these are just my thoughts. I kind of wish forward here as well, so she can kind of give her perspective. She's having to work all weekend, unfortunately, but she does send you guys her best. Let's see what else we got here. Okay. What is the real meaning of baptism, and will there be an opportunity in the future? Yes, there will be. In fact, just this past week or so, we were talking about we were talking about a couple things that will be happening in the future. Is baby and child dedication. We're going to be doing that in December. I figure, awesome. It's December. Christmas is all about celebrating a baby. What better time to do baby and child dedication? Okay, so we're going to be doing that, and then baptism maybe around January or so. I'm going to see. I haven't even asked them yet, but I'm going to see if we can use their pool, because they have a pool below us, which would be awesome if we could use that after service one day. So I'm going to see what I can sweet talk people down at the district. Basically, just pay them money. They'll let us use it. And then in the springtime, at our new house, we actually have a pool, so we'll do baptisms at our pool as well. So, yes, we will do baptisms. And we will do baby and child dedications as well, coming up. Okay, so now back to the first part of that. What is the real meaning of baptism? Now, this is something that is disagreed upon among denominations. Okay? So I'm going to tell you what I believe to be, the meaning of baptism and how we as RiverLife will sort of act it out. And it's this. Baptism is an outward ceremony, an outward showing of an inward decision. Okay? You have made a decision to follow Christ. That's an inward decision. You can do that without a single person knowing. But baptism kind of shouts out to the whole world, I want to follow Jesus. Okay? I want to follow Jesus. And I'm doing it publicly. That's why when we do baptisms, we're doing it in front of everybody. We're making it a big old party because it's a celebration when someone publicly says, I want to follow Jesus. And I'm going to participate with him in his death and resurrection. That's why we dunk. Okay, unless you're terrified of water, then we might sprinkle on you or something. But that's why we dunk baptize, because of the symbolism of being buried with Christ and rising again in new life with him. Okay? Two things that baptism is not. Baptism is not salvation. Okay? Baptism will not save you. It will not let you spend an eternity with God or an eternity apart from God. Okay? That has nothing to do with baptism. Also, baptism does not mean you have your life in order and you won't sin anymore. I've heard that from some parents, like back at our previous church when I was working with the youth. I had a parent come up to me and said, I don't understand why my son is being so naughty. He was baptized last year. I see no connection to those things. Okay. Well, of course he's disobedient. He's a teenager. Okay? You need to talk. Baptism has no bearing on that. But I think there's this perception that's really easy to buy into, that once I get baptized, then I have to be serious. I can't sin anymore. I've actually heard this from a youth. I was like, hey, they had me baptized, and so would like to be baptized. They're like, no, I just don't think I have it all together. It's like, dude, that's why you get baptized. Because you don't have it all together. So that's my short version on baptism. When the time comes closer, I'll actually preach a whole message. We'll look at Scripture. We'll look at how they baptized in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And then we'll all bring our bathing suits and get wet. Well, not all of us, but okay. So there you go, a little bit about baptism. Let's see. What kind of outreach efforts does RiverLife has to reach the second Gen Hmong? Word of mouth, Facebook, etc. Well, research has shown that the most effective means of outreach, and let me define that term, because that's different than service. Okay, so outreach, and we're going to wrap up pretty soon because it's 11:20 now, and I want to get you guys out on time. So outreach events. So specifically outreach is sharing the message of Jesus Christ to those who do not believe in Jesus Christ. Okay? So that is different than service. Service is loving the community in Jesus' name. Sometimes that can involve sharing Jesus' name, and it doesn't have to. The Bible repeatedly says, care for the widows and orphans. It doesn't say, care for the widows and orphans and tell them the gospel. We care simply because they are important to God. Okay, so that's service. But outreach. Research shows that the most effective means of outreach for a church are you guys. You know what the most attractive thing to draw somebody to a church is a transformed life. Lecturing them about their Bible or their clubbing last night or the decisions they've made. No one has ever come to Christ by being lectured about their clubbing. Okay? You want to know what draws people to Christ? You being transformed. And then taking an opportunity and telling your story. Being transformed by God and talking about it. What God has done in your life. Right? You guys are actually far more effective evangelists than I ever will be. Not just because I'm being white, right? But because you guys are the ones who are living daily with your friends and your family. So one of the biggest outreach efforts we have is creating a church where you can invite someone to. And they will enjoy it. They won't feel guilted. They'll feel comfortable. We won't give them visitor stickers. We won't have them stand up. Okay? That they can sit and enjoy a church service and enjoy God. That actually, honestly, is the best outreach, the best evangelical outreach tool out there is you guys. Okay? Now that doesn't mean we're also not going to do things. Okay? But the things we're going to do, the nature of outreach has very much changed among the second generation compared to the first generation. Okay? It's very unlikely that we will do like a big concert and fly in a singer, a really famous singer from California. Or, I don't know about you, but that's not as big of a draw. Okay? Now, what is a big draw is we did the costume carnival last week. And we had some people who actually came last week simply because they could bring their kids to a fun time at church. We had someone, they weren't able to come, but they actually sent their kids with their cousin. So their kids got to come to church and hear about Jesus Christ. Okay? One of the other things is when we start kicking off service projects, that people want to make a difference in this world. That's kind of wired into most 20-somethings and early 30-somethings want to make an impact. So when we have service projects, we're actually going to encourage you guys to invite other people. It's not just a service project for the church. Those are actually kind of research is showing that among 20 and early 30-somethings, millennials, that service projects are actually some of the most effective outreach methods out there. Because you talk to any college student right now, post-college student, they want to change the world. Unless they're disillusioned with life, having working in a factory or a cubicle, then they don't want to do anything and just watch Netflix all day. But yeah, so we're going to do some of that. And we're going to kind of figure out as spring goes on, we're going to do some other events, these monthly service projects. We might do like we want to do a praise and worship night. Hopefully our services, my desire is that you experience our services as places every week is an outreach event. Where this is safe enough that a non-Christian can come in and not feel shamed, guilted, or beat up. That they could feel accepted, encouraged, and find hope and healing. Okay, even for non-Christians. So my hope is you guys are invited, you guys are talking to your non-Christian friends and family during the week. And then you get a chance to invite them to church. That's why we shape Sundays like we are. Okay? So I got a few more questions here, but we're over time, so I'm going to hit these up on Facebook.